Professor Emeritus David Penington, Dr. Sanay Hussain, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural David Penington Lecture, an initiative of the ICT for Life Sciences Forum, St Vincent's Hospital and the University of Melbourne. My name's Luan Ismail. I'm the convener of the ICT for Life Sciences Forum. Some months ago, while preparing a tribute dinner for Professor Penington at the University of Melbourne, it occurred to several of us that we should probably establish an annual lecture series in which to pay tribute to his extraordinary contributions in public life, in medical research, medical education and health policy. And I'd like to thank the sponsors for turning this idea into reality this evening. I'd now like to invite Professor Mark Cook, the Chair of Medicine at St Vincent's Hospital, to introduce this evening's presenter. Please welcome Professor Mark Cook.
Thanks, Luan, and thanks all for coming. I'll just speak very briefly about David because I know he doesn't enjoy a long introduction. But David started his career at Melbourne University but completed his degree at Oxford, and in 1966 was approached by Carl de Gruchy to return to the Department of Medicine here at St Vincent's. He did that and took over the Chair of Medicine in 1970 when Carl de Gruchy retired. He made a number of very significant appointments here, Don Chisholm, Greg Whelan, Kerry Breen, Colin Chesterman amongst them, and he took on vigorously the course of reforming the medical school. He eventually became Dean of the Medical School in 1978 and through that sought to complete his task of turning university teaching hospitals into research-oriented departments and to further develop the specialties. He did this through a number of very significant and strategic appointments, the consequences of which we're still seeing. Apart from all that, though, he was instrumental in developing the first community health centre at Richmond, and at the same time became chairman of the National Blood Transfusion Service. And of course we all know this coincided with the development of AIDS, and his role in managing this and leading the national body around this was of course highly significant. He became the Vice Chancellor of the University in 1987 and went on to many other positions, Chairman of Cochlear, Pacific Dunlop Board and so on. The list goes on. And of course his interest in drugs of addiction has recently been brought to the fore again through developments in the newspapers. Now, the caption to his photograph in the history of St Vincent says, "Medical reformer and social activist," and I think that sums him up perfectly. Tonight then we're having our inaugural lecture, as Luan mentioned, around health policy, an interest of enormous, topic of enormous interest to David. And we've been lucky enough to get Christine Jorm. Christine has recently published this book, which is an absolutely spectacular account of circumstances around health policy, chiefly in relation to the New South Wales environment, where Christine's from, but of course the lessons are here for us all. Now, Christine's current appointment as Professor of Medical Education at Sydney Medical School was preceded by her appointments in School of Public Health and as an anaesthetist at St Vincent's Hospital, because her background is in anaesthetics, but before that in neuroscience, where she did her research higher degree. But I don't think there's probably anyone around who's got a doctorate in sociology and neuropharmacology. So that's quite an achievement. She was instrumental in putting together the Good Medical Practice Guide, which all physicians are familiar with, and as well plays a very significant part, obviously, in the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare as the Senior Medical Advisor, a position created for her. Now, the book, Reconstructing Medical Practice, it says in the blurb, examines how doctors see healthcare and their place in it, why they remain in medicine and why they are limited in their ability to lead change in the current system. And these all seem to be topics highly relevant to David's interests. So we welcome her tonight for this lecture. Thank you, Christine.
Look, thank you so much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I want to say how delighted I am to be here and how very honoured. I started the research that led to this writing of this book because I wanted to understand the behaviour of my colleagues. I am a doctor, I'm married to a doctor, and most of my friends are doctors. And that's the case for many doctors. Yet when I started working in safety and quality, I found the behaviour of my doctor colleagues quite inexplicable. Caring, dedicated people were inexplicably uncooperative with initiatives to improve the safety and quality of healthcare. I just had to understand it. And for my research, these same passionate, uncooperative, idiosyncratic individuals shared their motivations, frustrations and perspectives with me in great detail. And I mean a lot of detail. I would get home and my husband would say, "Who did you have on the couch today?" The interviews sometimes took more than an hour. And these were cardiac surgeons. These were people who were very, very busy. But the chance to talk to someone that understood about their world was one that they took. There were groups of them that I had wrestling with scenarios where there were gaps between what they could, would and should do. And they were funny, witty, passionate, and I greatly enjoyed the analysis and it resulted in a PhD. But instead of writing up my work as many papers, I waited because I wanted to write a book. And this is partly because there are no portraits of us, 21st century Australian doctors. It seemed bizarre to me that the conclusions of Becker's 1961 study, Boys in White, dealing with US male medical students, and, in fact, The House of God, 1978 satire, was still being trotted out as that's why doctors are the way they are. How does that relate to us in Australia in 2012? Not very much. And we don't have the research of our own. The second reason for writing a book was that the combination of this research with some extraordinary career opportunities I received through doing safety and quality work in healthcare meant I had things I wanted to say, I had ideas I wanted to share that I thought would be of interest to others, especially doctors. Once written, though, it took more than a year to find a publisher. I hoped to find an Australian publisher, and eventually ended up with a high-end UK academic publisher. Why? Because the publishers said that no one would be interested in reading the book. Doctors don't read. There's only room for popular, sensationalist books about healthcare. That was basically the message. And, in fact, my first writing attempts were populist. I tried to emulate Atul Gawande. I could do Atul, but my conscience wouldn't let me. I'm not comfortable to write and not give credit to the ideas of others. And for all of us, our ideas come from the work of other researchers and thinkers. So I ended up with a reference book. And I've been delighted to find that, in fact, Australian doctors do read and they do value evidence. It's incredibly exciting to be rung up by somebody like Professor Cook and be told, "We've been reading your book." I'm like, "Oh, we." It's more than one of them. That's what it's like when you're an author. It's a great out-known world into which you send your ideas. But to be asked to give the inaugural Professor Penington Lecture was something else again, and I'm deeply honoured. I've looked at Professor Penington's incredible body of work and had the great pleasure of talking to him by phone beforehand. He specifically asked me not to talk about his work. But of all his many achievements, I want to draw attention to one area where, in fact, I know he was a bit disappointed. And that is in the matter of the academic hospital. Prof Penington's arguments for this were very powerful, but have not been taken up by others in the way he'd hoped. I certainly commend his 2008 article on rediscovering the University Hospitals for Australia to anybody, and I very much hope that it's just a matter of these ideas being ahead of their time. Why should we not have a hospital where our medical schools and schools of health sciences are contributing the best scientists and the best clinicians, but even more, one accompanied by support from our business and management schools, by our health economists, instead of the amateur outfits that surround high-class medical and scientific work all the time. And I think that's a dream that we hope may eventuate in the future. It's not dead, dreams live on. So I do want to start my talk, therefore, with the hospital and a hospital story. In this talk, I want to focus on explaining why system engagement is simply not optional, but rather intrinsic to the work of the doctor, and how doctors might begin to reconnect and re-engage. The closely related subject of understanding how safety is created and doctors' role in creating this, roles that are outside of and potentially limited by ill-considered rules and excessive regulation, is a talk in itself. And while a passion of mine, I don't think we could accommodate that one tonight. So how well does our complex system work? I want to start with a case study. I'm sure these halls have heard an awful lot of case studies and an awful lot of grand rounds. I have one here that was sent to me by one of my master's coursework students. A middle-aged woman with severe degenerative spine disease, including a scoliosis and a previous L3-L5 fusion, was admitted for a further fusion and decompression of the canal L2-3 to free an impinged nerve root. She also suffered from difficult to control Parkinson's with severe rigidity and involuntary movements, producing frequent falls, which led her to spend a lot of time in a wheelchair, although able to walk. At surgery, she was noted to be severely osteoporotic, likely exacerbated by the lack of axial loading in the previous 1 to 2 years while spending time in the wheelchair. The operation went well. Screws were placed in the bilateral L2 pedicles and connected to pre-existing screws in L3-5. Canal and nerves were decompressed. She was fitted with a corset in light of her osteoporosis. The standard ward protocol for the care of patients that have had a spinal fusion dictated 24 hours bed rest, then mobilisation and discharge on day 7. Our specific post-operative instructions were bed rest for 3 weeks to allow healing. But a few times during those 3 weeks, we'd find this patient sitting out in a chair or up in bed because some well-meaning person had followed the protocol. She luckily suffered no new harm or pain from this. We wanted to keep her as long as possible to ensure her back had started fusing to try and minimise the stress on the spine and to minimise the risk of falls. This caused tensions with the private hospital administration, and after a few weeks the patient was discharged to rehab. She was not discharged for exercises, but to aid her in regaining the skills necessary to manage at home alone. Unfortunately, the patient required readmission from rehab with mechanical excruciating back pain and a CT showing the top screws having broken out of the vertebral body. The patient said that she had been pushed into doing a lot of exercises, including lifting weights and bending. When we contacted the rehab facility, their explanation was that that was their protocol for post-op spine fusion patients. Our letter with the specific instructions for this particular patient was ignored. She went on to have a revision fusion extending up to T8 and another longer stay in hospital. Now, the doctor writing is justifiably angry. But how many nursing staff would have been involved and could have been involved in caring for this patient in the private hospital? 30? 50? Typically, the time for handover is brief, and even worse, in a private hospital, frequently taped handovers are used. They're rarely at the bedside. Why should or could the surgeons realistically expect that the directions written once in their operating notes be handed on to every staff member every shift? And similar considerations apply to the rehab facility. We would not expect such a method to ensure safety or reliability in other areas of our life. This is an example of a system that doesn't work reliably. Complex, high-risk spinal surgery was undertaken. But that professionalism and care did not translate into work to ensure that the ward details and ward care turned out right. The doctors accepted and do accept archaic communicative practices and tools. There are solutions. And the current form of the patient record, with its emphasis on story, the ephemerals of what happened in the last shift, just means we get very thick notes, but doesn't ensure that the critical information is transferred reliably. The fact that it wasn't random, it was almost inevitable. And the doctors should have thought of that. It's not just about doing a good operation. How disengaged are doctors? Well, they're angry. Doctors in New South Wales are certainly angry. They're angry about petty things. They're angry about petty cash. They're angry about parking. They're angry about the lack of thank yous from their institution. And they have an extraordinary attitude to email. In New South Wales, at any rate, it often doggedly attempting to prevent any communication by this method. They'll proudly tell you, the hospital doesn't have my email address. I'm getting smiles from the front here. Or, I took my email address away from the hospital. Here's a quote from a gastroenterologist. When something really crucial comes along, it's in a thicket of emails that you probably don't read. So most of the important things don't even impinge upon my consciousness because they're buried in heaps and heaps of verbiage. Heaps and heaps of verbiage? Talking to people in New South Wales Health, they get about as many emails as I get from the university, and I don't mean the emails to do with my business and the students. I mean the emails to do with new research grants or the new Health R policies. 1 to 2 a week. It's not even 1 a day. So how does it seem that this is an unmanageable amount of information? It's interesting. They're angry about the quality of the system they work in. They feel it's a second-class system. And here's a plastic surgeon telling it how it seems to him. Years ago, you saw every patient with the charge sister in the morning. You told them you expected everything would be done expertly, and when you turned up at the ward, you expected the charge sister knew a hell of a lot more about looking after plastic surgery patients than you did. And if you had a problem, you asked her. No one has a plastic surgery ward anymore. Half the nurses are agency staff and have no idea what they're doing. You just feel the standard of care is sort of slipping out. It's just that we have to stop losing ground. I just think we need to stop the slide. And that's a plastic surgeon that doesn't work in the public hospital system anymore. And, you know, it's a sad thing. Talking to Professor Penington before the lecture, he was talking about his 17 years with Sister Christiana, someone that he formed a real team with, caring for many dying patients, in fact, a team under conditions of extreme stress, and somebody who went the whole yard, was there on the weekends, was there after hours, and was putting the effort in that he was putting in for those patients. That's not the system now. Doctors are angry about the quality of managers. A gynaecologist described it as like Brownian motion. There is no planning and there is no foresight and there is no communication. And the fundamental nature of the disengagement is really evident when doctors talk about the system. Most don't see themselves part of it at all. They talk about niches, holes, something to be got around, something to rise above. Some battle. Here's another gynaecologist. I'm not prepared to say that I couldn't work out the system enough to protect my patients from it. I'm not prepared to say that I won't do it. I've worked a way around a lot of the things that have holes in the floor that people slip through, and I just plug the holes up. This female gynaecologist, and you can just see her physically plugging up the holes for her patients. But she doesn't feel she's part of the system. She's a defender of her patients from the system and its perils. So we come then to the question of what is the job of the doctor? When I spoke to Professor Penington, he told me it's not just a job. And many doctors used exactly that phrase when they're talking to me. It's not just a job. Here's a couple who ruminated on professionalism. An anaesthetist says, members of the nursing staff might like to think of themselves as professionals, but they clock on and clock off, and that would not fulfil my requirements. Here's a cardiologist. Really, it comes down to if you don't know what to recommend, you always know how to act. And if you act in the patient's best interest at all times, that's really much the safer sort of thing and more rewarding as well. And this paediatrician was very clear. The professional has to get the job done no matter what the circumstances you are, no matter how tired you are, how distracted you are by family, no matter how uncooperative the patient is, I guess that's paediatrics, or whatever, you get the job done no matter what. So it's not just a job, but it's a commitment to the care of the patient and putting patient needs ahead of everything else. The focus group participants in the book abandoned wedding anniversaries, their children's birthday parties, for any theoretical call on their time. Oh, there's another doctor there that could manage it. Oh, I'd go in anyway. It was just fascinating. And I know Mark's read the book, but the wedding anniversary scenario is particularly hilarious, where most of them tried to make the partner feel guilty. I'd ask my partner, I'd tell them I wouldn't really enjoy it because I'd be worried about the patient, and I'd let them decide. And I thought, great. But that's a doctor's world, a complex world. The American writers on professionalism are fond of using rather overblown terms like sacred trust that don't sit well with us as Australians. But it is about a responsibility, and it's a responsibility that people don't put down and can't put down. And that is what distinguishes the job of a doctor. So if it's not just a job, and patient harm can be reduced by doctors leading system change, why aren't they? Because the majority aren't. And here I do want to add a caveat. When I worked in national health policy visiting every state, their greater leadership and involvement of Victorian doctors was generally evident on nearly every topic, and it really did stand out. So why haven't doctors in general, some excellent Victorians perhaps aside, realised their responsibility? Well, they're distracted. One of the key findings of my research was the stress of the concealed uncertainty in which they work. The evidence base behind medicine, behind the making of an individual patient decision, is scanty and fragmentary. So there's little evidence for the detail of decision making, and yet most patients demand doctors to advise, tell me what to do, and worse than that, to advise as if, what would you do if it was your prostate, your mother, your child? What they're asking is, advise me as if you care about me. It's a lot of responsibility. Doctors have great anxiety about litigation, and especially the associated public humiliation. Patient may slip through, complications may present from work 10 to 15 years ago. Often they describe themselves like officers of the bridge of the Titanic, aware of the disasters that might be out there. They use terms like, you never know, do you? Others try to see adverse events coming and say, let's get ready. Some are sure, if I was sued, I'd leave because of so much what I do is based on trust. And sometimes there is a disaster. And the disaster sometimes washes up the doctors as well as the patients. I'm sure many of you can think of some of these and some that involved yourselves and involved your colleagues. And what this means is that they need the support and the expertise of their colleagues, and it means they're reluctant to criticise them, let alone report them. So what happens when things are going wrong? No one's seeing, no one's hearing, no one's speaking. And the problem is that that's a problem. And of my erudite and often loquacious subjects, one question rendered them incoherent. And it was the question, do you think we are good at giving feedback to our colleagues? If not, why not? Here's an infectious diseases physician. This is going to be heavy, I think we're not, no, and that's in general really, or not accepted, that was sort of no, we're not that good at all, and it's sort of being worked on, and hopefully we improve, but we're not good communicators amongst ourselves generally, and I think it's a little bit too probably afraid of, Perfectly intelligent person that could give an excellent presentation on her area of specialty. There is scenario after scenario in the book where doctors won't act. My favourite one being one involving a failure of hand washing. To two surgeons. You're scrubbed and operating. Your colleague of equal rank appears, offers a cheerful hello, washes his hands for 30 seconds in gowns and gloves. What do you do? And the focus group members, most of whom were surgeons, agonised over these scenarios. Oh, you'd love to be able to say something. Well, you would if it was a registrar. Oh, but I don't know what I could say here. And some of them even tried to think of jokes. You could try and say maybe the water ran out, and you'd be making a joke that I noticed, and then he could say, oh, I must have not looked at the time, and basically they discussed ways of acting out embarrassment. None of them were able to contemplate saying, excuse me, what you did was not safe or ideal, or could you do it again? And it was very interesting. I'd love to say I could, that I would say something, but I know I wouldn't, was the message. And that's a pretty black and white scenario. It's a pretty black and white issue, just fascinating. Improving systems requires a bit of what might be called robust engagement, not just implied criticism, but scrutiny, real criticism and argument. And this work is simply hard for doctors to do, which doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. So what is realistic re-engagement with the hospital system in the modern world? Well, actually, Prof Penington might recognise this. Don't think we'll go back to the era where senior doctors and the matrons served turkey dinner to the patients on Christmas Day. Yes? That was a time, and that time won't be coming back. But extra role behaviours are essential to the functioning of organisations. There are lots of terms for these behaviours. I like organisational citizenship behaviour, and that was a concept developed by Dennis Organ, and his book on it was called The Good Soldier Syndrome. And it's behaviour by an individual that is discretionary, not recognised by the formal reward system. And there are 5 dimensions of it. The first is altruism, and that's helping behaviours towards an individual with a specific problem. And that's the kind of looking after your co-workers, the nurses, the cleaner who might be struggling with something in the corner. People who are not part of your direct command structure. Courtesy, preventing problems by keeping others informed. Conscientiousness, e.g. punctuality and attendance. Sportsmanship, amiable toleration of minor annoyances. Civic virtue, responsible participation in the political life of the organisation, such as attending meetings and keeping abreast of organisational decisions. And I'm sure you can all think of colleagues, and very angry colleagues. Wouldn't occur to them that there are some virtues they could be practising, and practising in a daily way in their workplaces. Virtues that, if they practised, would make an enormous difference to the functioning of the organisation and the care of their patients. And as we move away from strict hierarchies and individualised jobs to more team-based care, these behaviours are increasingly important. But we have to be able to identify their importance, understand the elements so we can model it and encourage it to junior doctors, to medical students. So, where do we start? I have 6 prescriptions. First, we have to accept the need to act. Here's an anaesthetist. We're probably deluding ourselves if we don't think that part of giving good care is trying to improve the system. We are. I think we insulate ourselves from the difficulties in the system by saying, well, all I can do is what I'm doing right now because I can't control those other things. And it doesn't have to be a battle. Managers are not riding fire-breathing dragons. In fact, their spit is usually pretty weak. And yet, for so many doctors, this is how they see their interactions. The next point is to start small. Engagement is about the details that determine how we feel about work and our workplace and our team, and the feelings that let us feel part of a team or an organisation or a group. The third one is to give messages to the managers about what is important. Here's a renal physician talking. What's needed in hospitals is where people have a real sense of belonging and know they can go and knock on Fred's door if their pay is not right, that sort of stuff. To ask for the local, to ask for the contactable. Management processes frequently deny doctors power and control over the tiniest substance of their work or even the physical details of their workplaces. Teaching managers at one stage, I played with the notion of allowing the surgeons control over the biscuits in the tea room. And I said, so what are you going to do if they'll only stock Tim Tams? Well, that's no good. We'd have to sort that out. We'd have to give them healthy eating guidelines. I said, well, so by the time you've micromanaged the stocking of the biscuit tin, what makes you think they'll want to work with you on anything important? And I sort of thought about this. And after a while, they were able to see, so what you're suggesting is when we want them to do early discharge after surgery, we should be able to say, you remember the good experience with the biscuit tin? I said, yes. You start small. You let them be in charge of things. You don't take it away from them because you don't like how they're doing it. Anyway, it was a small group of health service managers. I doubt it's had a rippling effect. But medical disengagement must be seen as a major management failure. Meetings without doctors are a problem, and they're not just, and not mainly, a doctor's problem. It is a manager's problem. If they are running processes that are seen as inefficient, time-wasting, disorganised and ill-timed, that doctors won't attend them. It's a management problem. And for some reason that is rarely said. The fourth point I'd like to make is that we need to advocate for anchoring more management processes to the roles and jobs of doctors. There's a huge difference in the duration of tenure between doctors and administrators. Specialists spend 20 or more years in a single role in an institution, while managers such as hospital chief executives, DMS, change every 2 to 3 years, and in the case of New South Wales at least, health ministers far more frequently. Doctors are both the corporate knowledge, but also the corporate passion. It's not just a job to them, remember. So why wouldn't you put them in charge of major details of how that job is run and organised? Doctors need to be at those tables, and not just the odd doctor. There need to be every second seat at those tables where important decisions about how things are run are made and how patients are cared for. Now, all doctors need some skills dealing with management if they're going to be effective at these meetings, but they're largely the same skills of compromise and negotiation they use with patients. A study of doctors at the Royal Melbourne Hospital by Brand in 2007 revealed a low level of participation in system-focused safety and quality activities. And reasons given for this included a lack of time and money and a perceived lack of skills in dealing with managers. It's a slightly strange thing to say. Remember, they're not on dragons. But about half my interviewees claimed they were powerless to affect change in their hospitals. Here's an anaesthetist. I don't believe I have power over anything, but that's mostly because I don't think there's a pathway for me to do it. A few times I have wanted to do something, not even big, but small, and I have not had any idea of the process required to go about it. It's frankly absurd that such intelligent people are so easily defeated by people they describe as clipboard-carrying nurses or managers of little talent. Yet they walk away from the engagement. They say it's too hard. Now, clearly some lack the skills. My husband, who appears occasionally in my talks, is a successful obstetrician and gynaecologist. He loves being a doctor, his patients love him, he spends far too much time talking with everybody, so we're not very wealthy, but, you wouldn't trade it. While he teaches students and is up to date with the literature, he's never been interested in research or the college. He's the man on the Clapham omnibus of specialists. And as a consequence, it's excellent for me to trial ideas out on. And he recently started delivering at a different private hospital. And he whinged to me about the quality of the Labour World ultrasound. It's still not right, he said, and I've discussed the need to update it with the NUM twice now. I said, you discussed it with the NUM? Yes, she completely agrees with me we need a better ultrasound. And I said, that's all you did? Well, yes, twice now. And she thought it was a great idea. I said, do you think she has the discretionary budget and the financial delegations to buy an ultrasound machine? Oh. So what do you think I should do? I said, well, you need to write a letter to the chief executive, you need to mention the word risk, and you need to preferably have it signed by all the obstetricians. Oh! But it's not untypical. And there are a lot of doctors that lack the most basic of skills in negotiation, in cooperation, in making change happen, the changes they want to, the changes they're passionate about. There's our poor anaesthetist. I've got no idea. I mean, that's a terrible state to be in. Have no idea how to change things in your workplace. And specific skills aside, being professional probably means opening emails from your employer. Remember I said start small. Number 5 is to rebuild your own small teams. A plastic surgeon told me, and it was a younger plastic surgeon, you can run a hospital from any kind of building or tent or anything you want. It's not so much the facilities as the staff, morale and people working together and feeling valued. And I think it's true. We could all manage that. And think of some of the stories from the recent Christchurch earthquake. Now imagine if we closed the back door in this theatre and suddenly this was the command centre for providing medical care for half of Melbourne after a crisis. I I think the people in here would probably organise a pretty good affair. And that's because doctors are expert bricoleurs, people who can construct what is needed for the moment out of what is at hand. They have special skills. There's something they do in their work that comes from that working with uncertainty. So we can rebuild our small teams even if the organisations and processes are complex. It's about starting small. It's about rebuilding rituals and practices within the medical community that can support staff, your colleagues and juniors, and improve patient care. What happened to that journal club you used to have that used to be good? Well, what usually happened was that some senior folk got too busy to come and some decided they had better things to do with their time. And that's all right. The loss of these things is not a tragedy. What is a problem is the failure to recognise that we need to keep working at rebuilding them. What do most Australians do on New Year's Day? I can tell you what I do. I resolve to eat and drink less and get fitter in the coming year. I do it every year. But I don't say, oh, I tried that last year. And I remember when I was fit. It's not helpful. It's about the continuing work that we have to do. And fitness is a good example. You get unfit, you have an injury, whatever, you've got to start all over again. And that building and rebuilding and organisational culture is work of that kind. It's not about it was good in the old days in my teaching hospital. It's about what bit of work can I do this week, this month, this year to start building that feeling back again. My sixth point is that both doctors and managers need to stop contriving new systems that are destructive to organisational climate, extra role behaviours and patient safety. People have to get the chance to know each other. The National Transportation Safety Board found that 73% of the incidents in its database occur in the crew's first day of flying together. So all this rubbish about they've got it right in the airlines, they have proper training, they all can just slip in and out. It's not so. Even in that environment, people need to know each other's strengths and weaknesses to function safely and effectively together. A NASA study found that fatigued crews who had a history of working together made half as many mistakes as rested crews. Which brings us to the fatigue literature. Introduced into the medical and other workplaces without adequate study of negative consequences for patient care. We have excessive numbers of shifts, too many handovers, too many locums and agency staff. How can you get to know people in those circumstances? And how can they get to know each other or the patients? Registrar's training schemes now involve entire states. Why teach someone who you may never see again, you may never share patient care with? And especially, why do the hard yards on performance management? Recently, in an MJ editorial, my friend Annette Catalaris and I questioned excessive rotations of junior doctors. The assumptions for the value of this practice are just not there. And that different environment where we had simpler health systems, less hospitals involved with training, meant that people got to know each other. And that was a thing that had a big contribution to safety. This is a picture that I took at lunchtime today at the Northern Hospital. And I was having lunch in the cafeteria with my friend Professor Jackson, and she said, I like this cafeteria. Everybody's here, the patients and the doctors and the relatives, everybody comes here. And I looked down, and that table there with the group of 5, it's a clinical team. The older gentleman with the grey hair was wearing a stethoscope around his neck, which I actually found rather quaint. It seemed a bit risky getting into his sandwich. But I loved it. I looked at them there, and they were taking time to eat together, to talk about things, to build a team. I said to her, well, it's a bit public, so they probably couldn't talk about patient details here. Well, they wouldn't have been. So they were actually doing team building and taking the time to do it. And I'm sure the consultants in that group could have been earning money somewhere else. So it's not like it's all lost. It does happen, but it happens in the small things. And sometimes it is about people setting their goals far too high rather than starting with those little things. Many doctors I interviewed, described the erosion of medical community and were really sad. The original title for the book, in fact, was The Breaking Heart of Medicine, and hence the cover illustration with the little folk doing the work to fix it up. But I'd rather like you to think of the work to be done as a big journey. And the doctors, rather than clinging together anxiously as they have done, need to be setting a course and pulling together, starting small and accepting there's a lot of work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jorm, for sharing your research with us and for introducing us to your impressive cast of characters. It's now my great honour to invite Professor David Penington to say a few words. Professor Penington.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be able to make some comment on a splendid lecture. We all of us, or the great majority in this room, would be medical practitioners, and we would all of us have entered medicine in the belief that there's a tremendous fulfillment in the relationship between the doctor and the patient, able to bring the knowledge and expertise that can solve problems and help a person. Of course, that human dimension of medical practice has gone through huge changes through certainly my lifetime with the development of many specialties and packaging of medical care in different ways. But yet, of course, it is absolutely vital that that fundamental fulfillment of a medical career, of the relationship with patients, to be able to give the best possible care, is central to the fulfillment of a medical career. Of course, in this hospital, there's always been the tradition of that human relationship, first declared by the nuns in every ward, and that tradition has lived on. And this also is a hospital with its commitment to unit meetings and reviews within that environment where professionals are again discussing the issues that matter to them. But in so many hospitals, the situation becomes more and more difficult. No, things can only be done because there isn't enough money to do things in the right way. And of course, the cost of healthcare are a huge headache for politicians, and they wish to control things in such a way that their budgets are going to be balanced and so on. Of course, that is part of the reality of life in the massively complex situation in a major hospital anywhere in Australia, anywhere in the world for that matter. But yet we have to maintain that human dimension within the profession as well as with our patients, if in fact medicine is to be delivering the sort of healthcare that we need to deliver to our patients. Christine has done a quite fascinating study over a long period in New South Wales in hospitals, a study of the culture of the profession and its difficulties in adjusting, its difficulties in making things work in the way that they need to work. During the debates about healthcare reform in this country in 2007, 8 and 9, again, there were many of these issues which tend to be brushed to one side, that in fact it was just a matter of being able to control the numbers, the budgets, and bureaucrats had the role to do this in states and national bodies, and that's really what mattered. During 2008, an inquiry into hospital care in New South Wales was commissioned by government after some accidents which were seen as totally unnecessary or should have been avoided. And that inquiry, headed by a QC, Peter Garling, noted the most striking thing was the complete separation between the profession and management in so many of the hospitals that he visited, that there wasn't that interaction, there was no sense of common purpose. Indeed, he said it reminded him of the great schism of 1024, when the Catholic Church and the Eastern Church separated and didn't talk to each other for a couple of 100 years. In fact, bringing in that sense of common purpose, of willingness to try and make things happen, finding a way to solve problems, to make it all work, is something which depends on the input, of course, of the profession, the medical profession and the other health professions, as well as management in partnership. And that's one of the big issues that Christine has been talking about, and the obstacles and what we have to do to be sure that that really becomes central to the lives of all of our hospitals. I'd like to thank her again for a marvellous presentation, thought-provoking for all of us in the way that we see healthcare delivered. And I'd like, on your behalf, to present Christine with a small task of further reading matter from one of the leaders of public health in Australia, from Flinders Medical Centre. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Professor Penington and Professor Jorm. I'd like to thank the ICT for Life Sciences Forum, the St Vincent's Hospital and the University of Melbourne for their commitment in initiating this lecture series. And I'd like to thank you for your attendance. We look forward to seeing you at the 2013 David Penington Lecture. Thank you and good evening.